Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to an era where caravans of camels trod across vast, endless deserts, transporting one of the most coveted treasures known to mankind, tea. Imagine walking along a dusty, windswept trail where the air is dry and the horizon never seems to end. You're not alone, though. With each step, you're following in the tracks of merchants and traders who once made this same journey. But unlike today, the roads aren't paved and your companion isn't just any regular traveler, it's a camel, well equipped to carry more than just tea. You probably won't survive this trek without the right knowledge and preparation, but don't worry, we're here for a more leisurely exploration. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, by the way, where are you tuning in from? Drop your location and the time there. Let's see how far this tea journey reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin with the camels, the true heroes of the trade routes. Thousands of years ago, these animals were more than just transportation, they were an essential part of survival on the long, arduous paths through Central Asia. Before motorized vehicles, camels were the unassuming lifeline for traders venturing across the desert. But their journey wasn't just about carrying goods from one market to another. These camels were the gatekeepers to a flourishing global trade system. Without them, many precious commodities, including tea, would never have reached the distant corners of the world. Now, take a moment to picture the caravan, moving slowly but steadily across the golden desert sands. The harsh sun casts long shadows across the terrain as the camels plod forward, guided by skilled handlers. The traders, dressed in light, dust-covered robes, walk beside them, alert and always prepared for anything that could happen on this long journey. Historians still argue about the exact origins of the first trade routes, but the consensus is that they were crucial in linking the East and the West, opening the door for exchanges that reached far beyond material goods. What we know for sure is that the camel played a significant role in these exchanges, especially when it came to something as universally loved as tea. Tea was a commodity of incredible value, a symbol of wealth and sophistication. It would travel thousands of miles, passing through desert landscapes and meeting people from every culture in between. But how did these camels manage such a demanding task? To begin, camels are uniquely suited to the desert. Known as the ships of the desert, these animals can endure extreme temperatures, travel long distances without much water, and carry heavy loads over unforgiving terrain. Their tough feet are designed to move across sand without sinking, and their bodies are built to conserve water, allowing them to travel for days without a drink. In fact, camels can lose up to 25% of their body weight due to dehydration, yet still survive. Imagine that, the camel, a true marvel of nature's design. As you continue this journey with me, imagine the lives of the traders, too. Their livelihood depended on the camels they rode and the precious goods they transported. Tea, one of the most beloved exports from China, would eventually make its way across the steppes, through deserts, and over mountains, all thanks to the trusted camels. Along the way, tea wasn't just a beverage, it was a symbol of status, a taste of civilization to be enjoyed by kings, queens, and aristocrats across the world. But not everyone could make this journey. The terrain was harsh, the weather unpredictable, and the threat of bandits was always present. But the camels, with their instincts and endurance, kept moving forward, ensuring that traders arrived at their destinations, ready to exchange goods and stories. Their journey was long, often taking months, but they played an irreplaceable role in one of the most important trade systems in history. Imagine now, the scene, camels walking steadily under the harsh desert sun. The traders are moving forward, one step at a time, with hope in their hearts that the journey will eventually end. The sand stretches endlessly in all directions, and the air smells faintly of salt and dust. There's no turning back now. You feel the weight of the trade in your hands, though not physically yours, because, in this moment, you're part of this historical narrative. The desert, while vast and empty, isn't silent. In the distance, you hear the soft clopping of camel hooves, the creaking of leather straps, and the low murmur of voices from the caravan. The camels aren't just walking, they're guiding this ancient route, a path that will carry tea across continents. The traders trust their camels, and the camels know the way, even through the most challenging of circumstances. Their feet know the desert better than any map ever could. Now that we've set foot on the path, let's dive deeper into the heart of this trade, the Silk Road. You might have heard the term, but it's more than just one road. It's a sprawling network of trade routes stretching from China all the way to the Mediterranean. These ancient highways crisscrossed Central Asia, winding through mountain passes, vast deserts, and plains, linking the east with the west. But let's focus on what made these paths so remarkable: the camels, of course. The Silk Road wasn't just about trading goods, it was about exchanging culture, ideas, and, importantly, teas. Though it's called the Silk Road, the trade wasn't limited to silk. It carried spices, textiles, precious stones, and, perhaps most notably, tea. But the journey wasn't a walk in the park. This was a perilous route, fraught with challenges. Camels were the only animals that could handle the extreme conditions of this journey. With their ability to carry loads of up to 500 pounds, these incredible creatures transported not only tea but every precious commodity that merchants dreamed of trading. The camels would often travel in caravans, a protective shield against bandits and the harsh environment. These caravans weren't just clusters of camels, they were well organized, with guides, merchants, and sometimes soldiers, all working together. The routes were long and dangerous, stretching over hundreds of miles, but the camels knew the way like no human could. With their excellent sense of direction, they navigated the desolate wilderness and often led the way, following ancient trails that had been passed down through generations of traders. Historians still argue whether the camels' abilities were merely instinctual or if they were trained over time to navigate these difficult paths. Some say the nomadic traders developed a deep bond with their camels, teaching them how to avoid certain hazards, like quicksand or sudden sandstorms. Others believe camels had an innate understanding of the land, relying on their sense of smell, sight, and hearing to guide them. Either way, it's clear that these animals were essential to the success of the trade network. When we talk about the beginning of the Silk Road, many people think of the ancient Chinese dynasties, which played a pivotal role in opening up trade routes. But it wasn't just the Chinese who were involved. The Central Asian nomads, primarily from the regions we now know as Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, were integral to this process. These nomads didn't just control vast herds of camels, they were also skilled horsemen and traders in their own right. As they roamed the open steppes, they became the intermediaries between East and West, helping to facilitate trade and bring exotic goods to the far corners of the world. One of the most significant roles they played in this system was guiding these massive caravans of camels across the endless desert. Without the expertise of these nomadic traders, it's likely the flow of tea, and the entire Silk Road, would have come to a grinding halt. While the merchants and their camels traversed the deserts of Central Asia, they faced not only natural obstacles but also the daunting risk of bandits. Desert bandits were a constant threat on the trade routes. These outlaws didn't care for the luxury of tea or silk, they cared for gold, silver, and whatever they could plunder. The camels, as slow-moving as they were, became a symbol of the vulnerable but essential nature of the trade. They carried everything merchants needed to survive, their lives and livelihoods were on the backs of these animals. But while traders feared the threat of robbers, they also knew that the caravan's organization, protection, and the sheer number of camels were often enough to fend off danger. In the heart of these dusty journeys, a unique bond existed between merchant and camel. Camels are known to be gentle animals, and they were treated with great respect, often given the best food and the most careful attention. Unlike horses, which can be more temperamental, camels were docile and strong. Traders would whisper soothing words to their camels, knowing that these animals had an uncanny ability to navigate even the most inhospitable of terrains. You can almost feel the rhythm of the journey now. The caravan continues its march, the camel's hooves creating a steady, repetitive sound against the dry earth. The traders are moving silently alongside, their thoughts lost in the rhythm of the march. Tea, still packed in tightly sealed containers, rests safely on the backs of the camels. As the journey presses on, the air grows hotter, and the sun beats down mercilessly. But still, the camels continue, their instincts guiding them, their bodies built for endurance. Historians still argue about how the traders managed to keep their caravans moving during such intense heat. Some believe they used simple tools like the sun and stars to find their way, while others suggest more complex systems of sand reading and tracking the winds. But one thing is certain, the camel knew the way. No matter how many obstacles arose, the camels always pressed forward, step by steady step, ensuring that the tea reached its destination. In many ways, the camels were the unsung heroes of the Silk Road. It wasn't just about carrying goods, they were the lifeblood of the trade routes, the quiet warriors who made everything possible. The camels, having been the steadfast companions of the traders, now find themselves at the very heart of a growing empire, the tea trade. It was during the early centuries of the Silk Road that tea began to make its mark in the Western world. Tea wasn't simply an exotic commodity, it was a luxury, an item to be cherished and revered. While the East had long appreciated its calming properties, the West didn't even know what they were missing. That is, until the tea was delivered by those resilient camels across the barren, endless sands. Imagine for a moment, you've crossed 1,000 miles of treacherous terrain, battling against scorching heat by day and freezing temperatures by night. After all that, you finally arrive at a bustling marketplace, where you witness the excitement of a tea transaction. The precious leaves, which have traveled so far, are now in high demand. But the journey doesn't stop there. The tea isn't just for immediate use, it's a symbol of wealth and status. Tea was often consumed in the courts of royalty, and it wasn't long before Europeans began to thirst for this exotic brew. But how did this journey unfold, and why was tea so valuable? Historians often speculate about why tea became such a coveted commodity. The simplest explanation lies in its rarity. In the early stages of the Silk Road, the demand for tea was primarily in China. But as word of its delicate flavor spread, tea became a drink reserved for the wealthy and elite. From the Forbidden City to the palaces of Persia, tea symbolized refinement, intellectualism, and sophistication. But the real trick wasn't just the creation of tea, it was in its transport. The camel's role became even more significant as the demand for tea surged. They weren't merely carrying bags, they were transporting liquid gold. The first recorded shipments of tea to the West were carried over the same routes. While traders initially kept the exact methods of tea cultivation a closely guarded secret, it wasn't long before knowledge of the leaves reached Europe. Some even say that the first time tea was tasted in Europe, it was so intoxicating, so different from anything they had known, that it left an indelible mark on the culture. Historians still argue whether the Western fascination with tea began as a form of class distinction or as an actual appreciation of the beverage's qualities. Some say it was both, with tea being used as a sign of sophistication and taste, while others argue that it simply filled a growing desire for new experiences in an ever-expanding world of trade. Either way, the camels, slow, steady, and unyielding, had unwittingly become the carriers of not just tea, but of an entire culture's transformation. By the 9th century, tea had become so valuable that it was traded like currency. The camels, once simple pack animals, were now seen as vital assets in the commerce of tea. Their steady pace ensured that the leaves were transported with care, and their unique ability to store water and survive in extreme conditions made them the ideal companions for long-haul journeys. For centuries, camels traveled tirelessly along these routes, their long legs and even longer endurance helping to move tea from one market to the next. Now, let's stop and think about the physicality of it all for a second. Picture the caravan trudging through the mountains of Central Asia, navigating narrow paths where only the smallest of missteps could result in disaster. The camels carry their loads of tea with surprising grace, despite the rough terrain. Their large, expressive eyes scan the horizon, almost as if they understand the magnitude of their journey. The traders walk beside them, keeping close tabs on their precious cargo. After all, a single misstep could mean that the tea would never reach its intended destination. The merchants know that everything depends on the camel's steady pace. But despite all the effort, the traders knew that their camels weren't the only factor in ensuring the survival of the tea trade. They relied on a system of rest stops, known as caravanserais, where both camels and traders could find refuge. These caravanserais were the beating heart of the Silk Road, a place of rest, food, and shelter. They were scattered along the trade routes, carefully placed to ensure that the camels and their human counterparts could keep moving without exhausting themselves entirely. The camels, in all their majesty and resilience, played a critical role in ensuring that the tea trade could thrive. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were occasional interruptions along the way, wars, political upheavals, and even natural disasters that disrupted trade. But time and time again, the camels pushed through these challenges. They never gave up, never faltered in their determination to deliver the goods. They were, after all, the true backbones of this great trade network. Today, tea is found in almost every corner of the globe, enjoyed by millions of people daily. From the streets of London to the bustling markets of Beijing, the influence of the ancient tea routes still lives on. But it's important to remember where it all started. The humble camel, with its steady gait and endurance, was the real hero behind the spread of this beloved beverage. Now, imagine a trader today, traveling on a high-speed train or a modern truck. While the journey may be faster, the camel, simple, yet steadfast, remains an icon of resilience in the face of adversity. You can almost hear the clopping of hooves, the gentle rustle of the tea leaves, and the hum of the caravan as it moves forward. As we continue our journey through the deserts and mountains of Central Asia, let's take a moment to reflect on the environment that surrounded these ancient trade routes. The landscapes themselves were as much a part of the Silk Road as the camels that traversed them. These lands were vast and inhospitable, stretching as far as the eye could see, with no sign of human life except for the occasional caravan. Yet, the camels were perfectly suited for these harsh conditions, as if designed by nature itself to thrive in the most unforgiving places on earth. The desert might seem empty and barren to us today, but to those who traveled it long ago, it was a vast network of roads and pathways, each carved out over centuries by the persistent footsteps of camels. They were the only animals capable of navigating these extreme environments, enduring long days under the scorching sun and cold nights when the temperature could drop to freezing. The camels knew the land better than anyone, perhaps even better than the traders themselves. But despite the camel's natural ability to survive, the journey across these desert landscapes wasn't without its challenges. The harsh winds and relentless sun could take their toll. The traders were often forced to adapt to the changing weather conditions. As the temperature fluctuated between extreme heat during the day and cold at night, the caravan had to be carefully managed. The camels were given special care, with their riders constantly watching for signs of dehydration or fatigue. Camels, unlike many animals, can survive without water for long periods, but even they had their limits. Traders had to plan their routes around oases and water sources, carefully rationing supplies to ensure that both camels and humans could make it to the next stop. Historians still debate the specific methods used by traders to manage the extreme conditions of the Silk Road. Some suggest that ancient maps were created by nomadic traders, marking out the key locations of water sources and safe resting spots. Others argue that the knowledge was passed down through generations, shared orally among the nomads who had lived in these regions for centuries. One thing is for certain, without this knowledge and the incredible endurance of the camels, the Silk Road would not have been able to function. But what did it feel like to be a part of this journey? What was it like to cross through these endless sands, the sun beating down and the air thick with dust? Imagine walking alongside the camels, whose steady, rhythmic gait provided a sense of stability in a world that could feel anything but. The traders, weary from days of travel, relied on the camels to guide them, trusting that these animals knew the way even when it seemed like there was no road in sight. The sound of the camels' hooves on the sand, the creaking of the wooden carts, the soft murmur of the traders, it all formed the soundtrack of life on the Silk Road. It wasn't just a trade route, it was a journey that involved every sense: the harsh brightness of the sun overhead, the crunch of sand beneath your feet, the taste of dust in your mouth, and the occasional refreshing coolness of water when it finally came. Now, let's pause for a moment and think about the cultural impact this trade had. The Silk Road wasn't only a conduit for physical goods, it was a vehicle for the exchange of culture, religion, and ideas. As the camels carried their loads from the east to the west, they also carried ideas. Buddhism, for example, traveled along these routes, reaching the farthest corners of Asia. The exchange wasn't just one way. It was a melting pot of cultures, each influencing the other. The camels, in their quiet, unassuming way, were central to this exchange, as they transported not just material goods, but the very essence of what it meant to be part of a global community. Imagine, then, how it must have felt to be a merchant arriving in a distant land, where the culture and language were foreign, but the taste of tea was universally appreciated. This exchange of goods and ideas helped shape the civilizations of both East and West. And, at the center of it all, were the camels, silently moving through time, carrying the world's treasures from one place to the next. As we journey forward, let's take a moment to think about the lasting legacy of these ancient trade routes. While the camels no longer carry tea across vast deserts, their story is still very much alive in the traditions we hold dear today. The slow, deliberate movement of a camel caravan is now just a memory, but the influence of that ancient trade continues to resonate in our world. From the way we drink our tea to the cultural exchange we experience today, the echoes of the Silk Road's camels live on in every sip, every conversation, and every connection. Perhaps there's something we can learn from these camels, their quiet resilience, their ability to persist through the most difficult conditions, and their role in bringing people together. The next time you take a sip of tea, think of the camels, and of the ancient journey they made to bring this beverage to your cup. And perhaps, in their steady rhythm, you'll find the same calm and peace that those traders found on their long, dusty journeys. As we continue through the bustling markets and dusty desert paths, let's take a step back to consider the role of rest and recuperation on this grueling journey. The camels, despite their strength and endurance, weren't immune to the effects of fatigue. Like their human counterparts, they needed time to rest and recharge. This is where the caravanserais, roadside inns built along the trade routes, came into play. These humble structures were more than just resting places for weary travelers, they were vital lifelines that ensured the survival of the entire trade system. Imagine, after days of relentless travel through the hot desert, finally arriving at a caravanserai. It's a sanctuary, an oasis of sorts, where merchants, camels, and traders could find food, shelter, and respite. The caravanserai was designed with the specific needs of long-distance travelers in mind. For the camels, there was ample space to rest, drink water, and graze on whatever food was available. The traders, too, were able to recover from the exhausting journey, washing away the dust and fatigue of the road before resuming their trek. These caravanserais were often located at strategic points along the Silk Road, serving as waystations where the next leg of the journey could be planned. For the camels, the break was vital for their well-being. Though the desert offered little in the way of food, traders would often make do with what they could find at these stops, feeding the camels with dried grasses or whatever forage could be found. The rest wasn't just for the camels either, it was for the traders who had traveled alongside them. These were not easy journeys. The traders, after weeks on the road, were physically and mentally exhausted. But the respite offered at the caravanserai was more than just a stop on the map, it was a moment to reset, a place to recharge. Historians still argue whether the caravanserais were initially a byproduct of the camels' needs or if they were a response to the increasingly complex trading system that developed over time. Some scholars argue that caravanserais were built for the camels and their handlers, but others contend they were constructed in response to the growing demand for safe spaces to exchange goods. Either way, these stops were integral to the smooth operation of the Silk Road. These inns were often large, communal spaces where merchants could eat, sleep, and trade. They had a unique design that catered to the needs of both humans and camels, with stables for the animals and separate areas for the traders to rest. The architecture was often simple, but functional. These were not luxurious places, they were practical, built to serve a vital purpose. The floors might have been hard-packed dirt, but the purpose of these caravanserais was not comfort, it was survival. But how did the camels find rest in such a harsh environment? The key to their recovery lay in the food and water they could access at these rest stops. Camels can drink up to 40 gallons of water in one sitting, which helps them survive in the desert for long periods. When they arrived at a caravanserai, the first order of business was usually a long, refreshing drink. After that, they would be allowed to graze, if possible, on the sparse desert vegetation that could be found around these inns. The animals would rest, sitting down in the cool shade, with their eyes half closed, listening to the sounds of the desert night around them. For the traders, the caravanserais were places of quiet camaraderie. Often, merchants who had never met before would find themselves sharing meals, swapping stories, and discussing the commodities they were transporting. Tea, silk, spices, these goods were not just valuable, they were the talk of the caravanserai, and often, the traders would exchange information about the best routes, the safest places to travel, and the best times to travel. These inns became the central hubs of the Silk Road, places where knowledge was exchanged as freely as goods. Imagine for a moment the smell of roasting meat over an open fire, the murmur of voices, the clink of metal as goods were unloaded, and the sound of camels snorting softly as they rested. The caravanserai was a place of connection and survival, where everyone, humans and camels alike, could take a moment to breathe before continuing their journey. Historians still debate how the infrastructure of the Silk Road supported such a vast network of trade. While the camels were the physical carriers of goods, the caravanserais were the logistical backbone, providing the infrastructure necessary to keep everything moving smoothly. Without these safe havens, the long-distance trade that flourished across Central Asia would not have been sustainable. The camels, after a long rest, would once again rise and continue their journey, their bodies recharged and ready for the next leg of the journey. The traders, too, would gather their goods, pack their carts, and head back out into the vast desert, following the path laid before them. Each caravanserai was a brief moment of peace in a long, arduous journey, but the work of the camels and traders never stopped. The rhythm of the Silk Road continued, as steady and unrelenting as the camels themselves. As the caravanserais fade into the distance, the desert stretches out before us once more, but this time, the journey takes a turn toward the unexpected. After weeks of travel across seemingly endless sand dunes, the caravan would inevitably face the harshest test of all, the desert storm. These sudden, violent storms were as much a part of the landscape as the camels themselves. When the winds picked up and the sand started to whip through the air, visibility dropped to nothing. For the traders, these storms were not just inconvenient, they were life-threatening. Imagine, if you will, the scene: the winds howl like a wild animal, the sand stings your skin, and the world around you disappears into a veil of dust. You can't see your hand in front of your face. The caravan comes to a standstill. The camels, their instincts alert, lower their heads to the ground, trying to shield themselves from the sandstorm's fury. The traders, blinded by the swirling dust, cling to their camels, relying on the animals to guide them through the storm. The sandstorm, which can last for hours or even days, becomes a true test of endurance. During these storms, the camels proved their worth yet again. Though they couldn't protect themselves from the elements, their training, and perhaps a little bit of luck, allowed them to survive in the harshest conditions. Unlike horses, which would often panic or become disoriented in such conditions, camels were steady, capable of enduring even the most extreme weather. They would hunker down and wait for the storm to pass, their long legs tucked beneath them, their humps acting as natural water reservoirs, storing the energy they needed to make it through the worst of times. Historians still debate how exactly the camels managed to endure these storms. Some suggest that their ability to withstand the storms was due to their unique biology, which allowed them to conserve water in the desert heat. Others argue that the camels' survival instincts were simply honed over generations of living in harsh desert environments. Either way, it's clear that the camels were a vital part of any caravan, helping to navigate treacherous conditions that could have easily brought the journey to a halt. Even in the midst of a sandstorm, the caravans would continue. The traders, having learned to trust their camels, would often close their eyes and let their instincts take over. When the storm finally passed, the landscape that had been so familiar now seemed foreign and desolate. Yet the camels, wise and unshaken, would move forward. It was as if they knew the way, no matter how disorienting the storm had been. In these moments, the traders were reminded that the true value of their camels wasn't just in their strength or endurance, it was in their unflinching ability to guide their masters through the harshest trials. Once the storm subsided, the caravan would resume its journey, but the bond between the traders and their camels had deepened. They weren't just animals and merchants, they were partners, each relying on the other to make it through. This mutual trust, forged in the heat of the desert and tested by storms, became the foundation of the trade network that spanned thousands of miles. But despite the resilience of these camels, not all storms could be weathered. There were times when the harsh realities of desert life led to tragedy. Sandstorms could wipe out entire caravans, and there were moments when the animals themselves would succumb to the hardships of the journey. Despite their immense strength, camels were not invincible. Yet, the loss of one camel, or even an entire caravan, was a rare and tragic event, as these caravans were often built to withstand the worst of circumstances. Historians still argue whether these tragedies were common enough to disrupt trade, or if the resilience of the Silk Road, bolstered by the strength of the camels, always saw the traders through. Regardless, the camels continued to serve as the lifeblood of the trade routes, moving goods and culture across the ancient world. Even as the caravans made their way toward their final destination, the memory of those storms, and the bond between man and camel, would linger. In the great narrative of the Silk Road, it wasn't just about the exchange of tea, silk, or spices, it was about the quiet strength of the camels, who carried not just goods, but the hopes, dreams, and resilience of an entire world of traders. Now, as the wind begins to settle, we take another look at the vastness of the desert, and for a moment, all is calm. The camels continue their journey, each step echoing through time. As the caravan presses onward, there's something about the long, slow rhythm of the journey that begins to feel almost meditative. It's not just the camels carrying the weight of the goods, they're carrying the weight of history. And the traders? Well, they're not just moving from one market to the next. They're part of a greater narrative, one that stretches back millennia, interwoven with the camels and the land they traverse. The scent of the desert, the sound of the caravan moving as one, the hum of life on the move, all of it is a quiet testament to the resilience of these ancient trade routes. But even so, the journey is not without its tensions. The stakes are high, the competition fierce. Despite the camel's steady pace, there were moments when the road would become fraught with danger. In the heat of the desert, traders competed not only with nature but with other merchants seeking to profit from the same markets. While the camels made sure that goods could move steadily along the routes, it was up to the traders to ensure that their wares reached the markets before others did. Time was a valuable commodity, and often it was a race to get to the next town or market first. The road was long, and yet, the stakes felt higher every day. The camels, for all their endurance, also had limits. The challenges of the terrain, combined with the pressure of the merchant's need for speed, could create moments of frustration. Sometimes, the pace wasn't fast enough, or the paths became too treacherous for the camels to maintain their usual steady rhythm. But when these moments occurred, it was clear that the trade routes were more than just a series of roads and animals, they were the living, breathing arteries of a global exchange. Let's take a brief pause and step back for a moment, for this section will highlight something that's often overlooked, the bonds between the people and their camels. In the harshest environments of the Silk Road, it wasn't just about physical strength or survival. It was about trust. The relationship between traders and camels was built on more than mere utility. There was an almost spiritual connection, a bond between man and beast that made the entire trade network work. Traders didn't just rely on their camels, they depended on them in ways that went beyond logic or reason. Camels weren't just animals to these traders, they were companions, guides, and often, the last line of defense against the dangers of the desert. For example, did you know that there are stories of camels who seemed to recognize their handler even after being separated for years? These stories, passed down through generations, paint a picture of camels that weren't simply following commands. They were forming relationships with the people who cared for them, remembering their handlers and their paths. Some scholars argue that this bond was so deep that it transcended mere animal instincts, suggesting that the camels could sense the mood or intentions of their traders, thus guiding them more efficiently across the harsh terrains. Historians still debate whether these tales of camel intelligence and emotional bonds are true or merely folklore passed down through the ages. Some suggest that camels are naturally intelligent creatures with the ability to recognize patterns, while others argue that the close relationship between traders and their camels was a result of the lengthy exposure to one another over long periods of travel. Either way, The bond between camel and trader was undeniably strong, providing the backbone for the success of the Silk Road. Now, as we journey deeper into the heart of the trade, imagine a scene at one of the bustling Silk Road markets. The camels are finally unloading their precious cargo of tea, and the traders are quickly setting up their stalls. They move with purpose, carefully arranging the goods, shiny silks, fragrant spices, and, of course, the tea. Traders barter fiercely, negotiating prices as if their livelihood depended on it, which, of course, it did. The competition is fierce, but there's an air of camaraderie too, as traders share stories of their travels, recounting tales of difficult storms, dangerous bandits, and, of course, the indispensable camels that made it all possible. Despite the challenges, the markets are alive with energy. The traders have made it, against all odds, and now, their goods, carried by the camels through vast deserts and over treacherous mountains, are about to be exchanged for something new. This is where goods and cultures meet, where ideas are exchanged as freely as spices and tea leaves. As the sun sets behind the mountains and the market begins to wind down, the camels rest, their work done for the day. The traders share one final meal before the long journey continues. In the quiet of the night, when all is calm, you might hear the soft groan of a camel settling into the sand, and the faint sounds of a fire crackling in the distance. The camels are more than just animals, they are the link between the East and the West, the carriers of trade, culture, and life. And as they rest, they carry with them the stories of their long journeys, stories that will last long after the markets close. Now that we've passed through the bustling markets, where tea and silk exchanged hands, let's take a moment to reflect on the long-lasting impact these trade routes had on the people who lived along them. The Silk Road didn't just transform merchants, it reshaped entire civilizations. As camels carried tea, spices, and other goods, they also carried culture, religion, and knowledge. The exchange wasn't just about trading material goods, it was about the sharing of ideas, philosophies, and innovations that would influence the course of history for centuries to come. In the vast deserts and fertile valleys of Central Asia, the constant flow of caravans brought new ideas to different cultures. In some places, it was the introduction of Buddhism to the lands of China and India. In others, it was the rise of new political systems or the spread of scientific knowledge, especially in fields like astronomy and medicine. As merchants traded their goods, they also shared their stories and the knowledge they had gained along their travels. The camel, while it might have seemed like an inconspicuous part of the trade, was, in fact, a key link in this cultural exchange. Without the camels to carry goods from one place to another, these ideas would have spread much more slowly, or not at all. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Silk Road was its role in the spread of religions. Buddhism, for example, traveled from India to China and beyond, carried by merchants and pilgrims who used the Silk Road. They didn't just carry tea and silk, they carried sacred texts, religious symbols, and knowledge of spiritual practices. Along the way, these merchants and pilgrims also exchanged ideas with the people they encountered, blending their beliefs with those of others. Some scholars argue that the Silk Road was one of the key factors in the spread of Buddhism, as it allowed the religion to reach distant lands. But not all exchanges were peaceful or harmonious. There were also moments of conflict along these routes, encounters between different cultures that sometimes led to violence or misunderstandings. For example, the great empires of Persia and China often found themselves in conflict over control of trade routes, which sometimes led to bloody battles. However, these conflicts were often followed by peace treaties and new alliances, allowing trade to continue. The camels, ever present and steady, remained unshaken by these events, continuing their journeys no matter the political situation. Historians still debate how much of the Silk Road's cultural exchange was the result of intentional efforts to spread knowledge and how much was simply the byproduct of trade. Some argue that the movement of people and goods was primarily for economic gain, and cultural exchange was a secondary effect. Others, however, believe that the movement of people and ideas was the main driver of the Silk Road. Regardless, it's clear that the camels played an indispensable role in this process. They carried not only goods but the very foundation of the interconnected world we live in today. Imagine now, as you walk alongside the caravan once more, how the world must have looked to those ancient traders. You are crossing deserts and climbing mountains, facing the unknown at every turn. And yet, as the camels plod steadily along, there is a sense that these paths, the same ones taken by countless travelers before you, have a deeper purpose. The camels are not just transporting goods, they are helping shape the future. Each step they take on this ancient trade route is a small part of a greater story, one that stretches across continents and centuries, shaping the world as we know it today. As the caravan continues its journey, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the sand. The camels move slowly, but with purpose. The traders, now familiar with the rhythm of the journey, settle into a comfortable silence, each person lost in their thoughts. The world is vast, but in this moment, it feels small, connected by the steady, rhythmic movement of the camels, who have carried not just material goods, but the dreams and ambitions of the civilizations they helped connect. The peaceful, almost hypnotic pace of the caravan lulls you into a state of reflection. As you think about the camels and their role in the vast network of trade, you begin to realize that the true value of the Silk Road wasn't in the goods it carried, it was in the way it brought people together. It was a route of connection, where cultures, ideas, and beliefs could meet, mix, and merge. And through it all, the camels remained steadfast, the silent heroes of a journey that spanned both time and space. Even today, we can trace the threads of that journey, whether in the art we admire, the spices we taste, or the tea we drink. The Silk Road may have faded into history, but its legacy endures. And in that legacy, the camels continue to carry the weight of history, one slow, steady step at a time. As the caravan continues to wind its way through the desert, we begin to approach the end of our journey, not just the physical distance traveled, but the deeper journey that spans time and cultural exchange. The end of the road is not a simple destination, but the culmination of centuries of trade, collaboration, and sometimes even conflict. And while the camels have long since faded from the literal scene, their legacy is undeniable, carrying not just tea, silk, and spices, but the very foundations of the world's interconnectedness. Let's take a moment to reflect on how trade routes like the Silk Road set the stage for a globalized world. The ancient Silk Road, now a faint memory on the map, laid the groundwork for the modern age of commerce and culture. While camels no longer transport goods across the world, the idea of global trade, of goods and ideas moving freely across vast distances, lives on. Today, we may not need camels to cross the desert, but we still need the same spirit of cooperation and perseverance that the camel caravans embodied. It's the kind of spirit that built not only markets and economies but also a common understanding among people who, for centuries, were separated by seemingly insurmountable distances. Historically, the impact of the Silk Road cannot be overstated. It wasn't just about the material wealth that was exchanged, it was about the transmission of knowledge, art, religion, and technology. As merchants crossed deserts and mountains, they didn't just carry products, they carried stories, ideas, and practices that would change civilizations. Buddhism spread across Asia, reaching as far as China, while Chinese inventions like papermaking and gunpowder traveled westward, shaping the future of warfare and literature. But what made this exchange possible? It wasn't just the goods or the traders, it was the vehicles of these exchanges, the camels. These creatures, with their innate ability to travel long distances, endure extreme conditions, and remain unfazed by the vastness of the desert, were the silent facilitators of this grand exchange. Without them, it's difficult to imagine how the complex web of trade, culture, and knowledge could have flourished. Imagine now, after all these years, the deep connections formed along the way, connections that still resonate in the world we live in. Tea, once a rare and luxurious commodity, is now consumed around the globe. The simple leaf, passed from one camel's back to another, became the foundation for entire industries. The ancient trade routes connected people who otherwise may have never met, fostering a spirit of exchange that transcended language, borders, and even time itself. Historians still argue about the exact impact of the Silk Road, but one thing is clear, it changed the course of history. It brought the East and West into contact in ways that were previously unimaginable. While the camels themselves might have seemed like mere beasts of burden, their role was far more significant than anyone could have predicted. They were not just carrying goods, they were carrying the future. The importance of camels in these trade routes isn't something we often consider today. When we think about ancient trade, we often picture bustling markets and sophisticated cultures. But behind every successful trade network was a system of transportation, simple, reliable, and, in many ways, incredibly sophisticated for its time. The camels were the unsung heroes who carried the weight of history, both literally and figuratively. As we reach the end of our journey, it's important to remember that these paths, these routes, and these connections laid the foundation for the world as we know it. The story of the camels is not just about an animal species, it's about the resilience and determination required to build something that transcends borders and time. The camel, with its strength, endurance, and quiet wisdom, was more than just a means of transport. It was a symbol of the human spirit's unyielding quest to connect, to trade, and to share ideas across the globe. As we leave behind the deserts of Central Asia, the legacy of the Silk Road continues to live on. And though the camels may no longer walk the sands, their impact is still felt today. The world may have changed, but the spirit of the trade routes remains, alive in the tea we drink, the goods we exchange, and the connections we make every day. So, as the stars emerge in the desert sky, think of the camels and the long journey they endured. They carried with them the dreams and hopes of traders, merchants, and civilizations. And in their quiet, steadfast way, they helped bring the world together, one step at a time. As the caravan rolls forward, through deserts, past mountains, and into ancient cities, let's take a step back and examine the ways in which the legacy of the camels and their contributions to trade are still with us today. The camels of the ancient Silk Road may no longer cross vast deserts, but their impact on global commerce and culture is far from gone. The journey of these animals, their heavy loads carried across harsh terrains, paved the way for a network of trade that forever changed the world. The journey they helped create laid the foundations for modern international trade, as we now depend on ships, planes, and trains to move goods across continents. Today, the Silk Road might seem like a thing of the past, but the lessons learned along those ancient paths remain relevant. The world's major trade routes still exist, but now they're accessed through technology and infrastructure that would have seemed unfathomable to those ancient merchants. Yet, the core idea, the exchange of goods, cultures, and ideas, still carries on in the markets and trade hubs around the world. And the one thing that remains constant? The relentless pursuit of connection. Just as camels once crossed the Earth's vast expanse, today we cross the globe through a web of highways, railways, and air routes, constantly connecting, exchanging, and sharing. Think about the goods you rely on daily. Many of them, whether it's tea, spices, or textiles, owe their journey across the globe to the ancient routes forged by these camels. For centuries, trade was not only about economics, it was about building bridges between different cultures. These goods, the tea from China, the silks from India, didn't just change the way people lived, they shaped the very course of history. And it was the camels who made it possible. Without them, the exchange of these precious goods would have been almost impossible. In fact, if you stop and think about it, tea, one of the most commonplace beverages in the world today, owes its global existence to these ancient trade routes. Tea was a drink of the elite at first, something consumed by emperors and royalty. It was only through the camel's labor that it reached distant lands, from the courts of Persia to the teapots of Europe. Camels didn't just transport goods, they helped create a global demand for what we now consider essential commodities. The humble tea leaf was carried not only across land but across cultures, making its way to places where it had never been seen before. Historians still debate how tea went from a Chinese secret to a global staple. Some believe that the traders themselves were the first to recognize the value of tea beyond its medicinal properties. Others argue that it was the rise of European colonial powers that brought tea to the West in large quantities. Still, the true spread of tea, like many things, owes its success to the faithful camels who bore the goods across thousands of miles of perilous terrain. Let's zoom out for a moment. The legacy of the Silk Road trade routes and the role of the camels can still be seen in the global trade we engage in today. These ancient routes formed the early stages of global commerce, and as the world grew more connected, it evolved. Now, what took camels weeks to transport can be moved across continents in a matter of days. But even as technology has sped up transportation, the foundational principles that guided the Silk Road, cultural exchange, trust, collaboration, are still relevant. The camels, though no longer needed for this global exchange, remain as symbols of the resilience and adaptability that we can all strive for. In an age where we're connected by digital networks rather than long caravans, it's easy to forget the importance of physical transport and the role it played in creating the world we know. Yet, every time a product crosses international borders, or an idea moves from one culture to another, we see the lasting impact of the trade that camels once helped make possible. As the caravan heads deeper into the heart of the trade, the story of the camels is a reminder of the journey we're all still on, a journey of connection, commerce, and exchange that never truly ends. From the ancient traders of Central Asia to the merchants of today, we continue to walk the same paths, albeit faster and with more technology. The camel's legacy lives on in every good, service, and idea that crosses our borders. So, as we come to the end of our journey across the Silk Road, think of the camels one last time. They were more than just transport animals, they were the silent carriers of history, and through their steady, patient movements, they helped connect the world in ways that still reverberate today. And as you sip your tea, perhaps take a moment to appreciate the journey it's been on, across deserts, over mountains, and through centuries of trade. As we move further into the story, let's take a step back and look at the way the world changed when these ancient trade routes began to fade. With the fall of the great empires that once ruled the Silk Road, the paths once traveled by camels slowly became less traveled. The caravans that once carried tea and silk across the vast deserts began to disappear, replaced by new forms of trade, railroads, steamships, and eventually airplanes. But while the camels no longer walk those same paths, their legacy remains a powerful thread in the fabric of global commerce. One of the key turning points came with the rise of maritime trade. The construction of sea routes, with their reliance on ships, began to eclipse the overland paths of the Silk Road. By the 15th century, with explorers like Vasco da Gama charting new paths around Africa and opening sea routes to India and beyond, the old caravan trails were gradually abandoned. The camels, once the lifeblood of trade, became symbols of a bygone era. But this shift didn't come without its own set of challenges. The transformation in global trade was not an instantaneous change. It took time for new systems to be fully established and for these sea routes to become the new centers of commerce. Historians still debate whether this shift marked the end of the Silk Road's influence or whether it merely transformed into something new. The sea routes allowed for faster transportation of goods, but they also introduced new risks, storms, piracy, and the complications of open water navigation. Despite these obstacles, maritime trade quickly began to dominate. The camels, once essential for the movement of goods, were now relegated to smaller-scale, local trade routes. While the vast and dangerous deserts no longer needed their support, the lessons learned from the days of camel caravans would shape the way the modern world connected. Now, think about it for a moment. The camels, with their slow, deliberate pace, are in many ways the antithesis of the modern world, where speed is everything. In the digital age, where a product can be ordered from halfway around the world and delivered within days, the camel's journey seems impossibly slow. Yet, there's something almost poetic about the slowness of it all, the measured pace of life along the Silk Road, where the journey itself was as important as the destination. In a world that values speed and efficiency, there's a certain wisdom in the way the camels, with their patience, helped shape the course of human history. While the camels may no longer be the primary method of transporting goods, their symbolic importance is impossible to overstate. They represent the quiet, steady determination that built the foundations for global trade. Without them, the exchanges that occurred along the Silk Road would not have been possible, and the cultures that met on those paths may never have had the opportunity to share their ideas, beliefs, and innovations. Imagine for a moment the world without the Silk Road. The tea that now sits on our kitchen tables might never have reached Europe, and the spices that flavor our foods may have remained exotic novelties. The world's knowledge might have been divided, with cultures isolated from one another, unable to share their discoveries and advancements. The camels, through their patience and endurance, were the quiet architects of a more connected world, a world that would eventually give rise to the global society we know today. So, while the age of the camel caravans may have ended, the spirit of that ancient trade route lives on. It's evident in the way we exchange goods today, in the way we build connections across borders, and in the way we continue to trade not only material items but also ideas. Whether it's the tea we drink or the technology we use, the legacy of the Silk Road, and the camels who carried its goods, still shapes the world in ways we can hardly imagine. In many ways, the camels were ahead of their time. They embodied resilience, perseverance, and adaptability, traits that have served humanity well as we continue to evolve and adapt to new ways of life. Their journey is a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, there will always be value in the patience and endurance to carry on, step by step, toward a shared goal. As we move forward in time, it's worth remembering that the connections we take for granted today, the ability to connect with someone halfway across the world in an instant, are built on the same foundations laid by those ancient traders and their camels. The camels didn't just help carry goods, they helped carry humanity's dreams and aspirations, pushing us toward a future where no distance is too great and no connection is impossible. Now that we've reached the twilight of the Silk Road, let's take a moment to reflect on the profound transformations that occurred as a result of this ancient trade network. Though the camels no longer tread the same paths, the legacy of the Silk Road endures in ways we don't always realize. It's easy to think of history as something that belongs to the past, but in reality, the Silk Road is a living, breathing part of our modern world. The cultures, goods, and ideas that cross those ancient paths continue to shape everything from the food we eat to the technology we use. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Silk Road is how it shaped the world's cultural landscape. Today, we take for granted the diversity of foods, philosophies, and practices that are part of our daily lives, but these were all products of centuries of exchange along the trade routes. The influence of the Silk Road is evident in everything from the spices that flavor our cuisine to the way we think about art and architecture. The camels, by carrying these goods from one place to another, became the vehicles of cultural exchange, bringing not just tea and silk, but the very ideas that would go on to influence entire civilizations. Consider the way tea, once a luxury of the elite, has now become a universal drink. It's a staple in homes around the world, consumed at all times of the day. The camels, those quiet travelers of the desert, were responsible for bringing this simple, yet transformative, commodity to far-flung corners of the globe. They didn't just carry goods, they carried the potential for cultural transformation. Tea, in many ways, became the thread that wove people together across continents, transcending borders and cultural divides. Today, when we sip tea, we're not just tasting a beverage, we're participating in a centuries-old tradition of global exchange. The camels also played an essential role in the spread of other ideas, such as religion, technology, and scientific knowledge. As merchants moved along the Silk Road, they carried more than just physical items, they carried beliefs and innovations that would go on to change the world. For example, Buddhism, which originated in India, spread to China and beyond through the efforts of traders and travelers who used the Silk Road. The camels, as they carried goods across the desert, unknowingly helped spread one of the world's major religions. The spread of scientific knowledge was another key development facilitated by these trade routes. The camels didn't just transport commodities like silk and tea, they helped move ideas about medicine, astronomy, and mathematics across continents. The ancient world's great centers of learning, from the libraries of Alexandria to the courts of the Tang dynasty, were enriched by these exchanges. The camels were silent conduits of this knowledge, carrying the seeds of future discoveries that would change the course of human history. Now, let's turn our attention to the technological advancements that grew out of this exchange. While we often think of the Silk Road as primarily a conduit for luxury goods, it was also a route for the exchange of technologies. One of the most significant examples of this was the spread of papermaking, which originated in China and was eventually carried westward along the Silk Road. Thanks to the camels that carried not just goods, but innovations like papermaking, the spread of written knowledge accelerated, laying the groundwork for the development of books, printing, and, ultimately, modern education. Historians still debate the exact speed at which these ideas and technologies spread along the Silk Road. Some believe that the exchange was a slow process, occurring over many centuries, while others argue that it was a more rapid exchange, with merchants and travelers quickly adopting and adapting new ideas. Either way, it's clear that the camels played an indispensable role in facilitating this exchange. Their steady progress, their resilience in the face of hardship, and their ability to traverse vast distances made them the ideal carriers of these transformative ideas. As we move closer to the present day, it's easy to forget just how much the ancient trade routes shaped the modern world. The camels of the Silk Road, though long gone from the desert paths they once traveled, left behind a legacy that still impacts us today. From the spices we sprinkle on our food to the technology we use in our daily lives, the camels and their role in the Silk Road helped lay the foundation for the interconnected world we now inhabit. In a sense, we are all part of that legacy. Every time we connect with someone from another culture, every time we exchange ideas, we are following in the footsteps of those ancient traders and their faithful camels. The Silk Road didn't just connect people, it connected worlds. And in a world that often feels divided, the lesson of the Silk Road is clear: connection is the key to progress. The camels, through their slow, deliberate steps, showed us that even the longest journeys can begin with a single step, and that those steps, though small, can lead to world-changing transformations. As we bring this journey to a close, take a moment to think about the camels and the roads they traveled. Their journey was not just a physical one, it was a journey of ideas, cultures, and connections that still reverberate today. The camels may have been silent in their movement, but their legacy speaks volumes. They are the unsung heroes of history, whose patience and perseverance helped build the foundation for a world that is, at its heart, still connected by the same roads they once traveled. As we move toward the final leg of our journey, let's take a moment to consider how these ancient routes and the creatures that carried goods across them have shaped the modern world in ways we often overlook. The end of the Silk Road, with its camels, traders, and caravanserais, didn't mark the end of cultural and economic exchanges, it was merely a shift in how the world remained connected. As the world moved from one method of transport to another, from camels to ships and eventually to airplanes, the core values of the Silk Road, of trade, exchange, and connection, have persisted in every global interaction that followed. In today's world, where we have fast trains, airplanes, and the internet, it might seem almost inconceivable that goods used to move across continents at a slow, methodical pace. Yet, the essence of that trade, the building of bridges between cultures, the sharing of knowledge, the exchange of goods, has remained the same. Modern globalization, much like the ancient Silk Road, thrives on the same principles that those early caravans embodied. What's different today is the speed and scale, but the connections that are forged remain deeply rooted in the history of that ancient trade route. One of the key elements of the Silk Road was its ability to create cross-cultural exchanges. The camels that transported goods from China to the Mediterranean not only carried physical commodities but also cultural artifacts. Art, language, religion, and technology all traveled along these routes, influencing the civilizations that came in contact with them. The merchants, even as they traded in silk or tea, were also bringing new ideas with them, creating a dynamic interplay of cultures. Today, we see a similar phenomenon through modern trade, with ideas and innovations often crossing borders just as easily as goods do. Whether it's technology, food, or entertainment, our globalized world mirrors the ancient exchanges of the Silk Road. We also see the impact of the Silk Road in our modern-day understanding of commerce. The global supply chains we depend on today, whether for electronics, clothing, or even food, have roots that trace back to the old trade routes. The same interconnectedness that camels once facilitated through deserts is now maintained by airliners, shipping containers, and railroads. But just like those traders and camels of the past, today's global supply chains rely on the same principles: the movement of goods, the negotiation of value, and the building of relationships across borders. The infrastructure of global trade that we take for granted today was, in many ways, first pioneered along those ancient routes, where the fate of entire civilizations depended on the slow and steady progress of caravans. Interestingly, the symbolic nature of the camel has also endured throughout history. In many cultures, the camel represents endurance, patience, and resilience. These qualities were essential for survival on the Silk Road, where merchants and animals alike faced endless hardships and dangers. The camel, with its resilience and unflinching determination, became a symbol of the very spirit of the Silk Road. In today's world, when we talk about perseverance through difficult circumstances or adapting to global challenges, it's easy to see how the metaphor of the camel continues to resonate. Despite the fact that camels no longer carry goods along the vast desert paths of Central Asia, their role as the foundation for modern trade systems is indelible. It's not just about the physical transportation of goods, it's about the unspoken trust that formed between the camel and the merchant, the patience and perseverance that marked every step of their journey. These values, resilience, adaptability, and connection, are as relevant now as they were centuries ago. We may not be traveling along desert roads today, but we still rely on these same principles to navigate the complex, interconnected world of modern trade. Now, let's take a moment to think about how the camel's steady, deliberate journey mirrors our own lives. In a world where everything is moving faster than ever, there's something remarkably beautiful about the pace of the caravan. Their journey wasn't rushed, it was steady, deliberate, and persistent. Perhaps this is a lesson we can take with us. In a time when we're often encouraged to move quickly and accomplish more, the slow, patient pace of the camel might remind us of the value in taking our time and building relationships that endure, and in understanding that progress doesn't always require speed, it requires persistence. The legacy of the Silk Road and its camels is not just in the goods they transported, but in the way they connected the world. It's easy to imagine that the camels, trudging slowly across the desert, carried more than just silk and tea. They carried with them the seeds of a globalized world, where cultures meet, ideas are shared, and goods move across borders with the potential to change everything. As we bring our journey to an end, let's remember that the story of the camels is not just one of the past, it's a story that continues today. Every time we connect with someone from another culture, every time we exchange goods or ideas across borders, we are continuing the work that those ancient traders and their faithful camels began. The Silk Road may be a relic of history, but the values it embodied are alive and well in the global community we are part of today. And so, we come full circle. The camels may have moved on, but their legacy endures, reminding us that the journey is just as important as the destination. As we continue to connect, trade, and share with others, we honor the slow, steady spirit of those camels who knew the way and helped bring the world closer together, one step at a time. As we draw nearer to the end of this journey, it's worth noting the profound impact that the decline of the Silk Road had on the world. Although the great camels no longer travel the same paths, their legacy doesn't fade simply because the roads they once followed have changed. The ebb and flow of global trade routes through the centuries may have shifted, but the fundamental purpose of those ancient trails, connecting people, exchanging goods, sharing knowledge, remains the same. The collapse of the Silk Road's prominence didn't end the trade that camels helped establish. Instead, it evolved. After centuries of cultural exchanges, the old routes became less traveled, and new trade systems arose. The fall of empires and the rise of maritime routes marked a shift from the overland trails, but it was only one chapter in an ongoing global story of connection. Today, we live in a world that is constantly shifting and adapting, much like those early merchants and their camels. Global trade systems now rely on advanced technologies, but there are still threads that connect us to those ancient systems. The spirit of the Silk Road lives on in the way we build relationships, exchange ideas, and trade goods. We may no longer rely on camels to cross deserts, but the core idea of human connection and cooperation remains unchanged. Just as the traders trusted their camels to deliver goods across vast distances, we now place our trust in logistics companies, shipping containers, and digital networks to bring the world together. But at the heart of it all is the same basic need, to connect. What's more, the trade routes of the Silk Road did more than just carry goods, they carried the very essence of the human experience. We saw how tea, silk, and spices crossed borders, but so did the arts, sciences, and philosophies. Even now, as our modern world becomes more connected than ever, we continue to see the flow of ideas in the same way. Whether it's the rise of social media or the global exchange of scientific knowledge, the spirit of the Silk Road lives on in the way ideas move freely across continents. The camels, once the quiet carriers of ancient cultures, were the first to model what we now do every day through digital means, bridging gaps, creating connections, and expanding our global village. Even in today's globalized world, the lessons of the past continue to resonate. The camel's endurance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds speaks to our own resilience in the modern age. The world we live in, though faster and more interconnected, still requires patience, perseverance, and, above all, the willingness to connect across distances, whether they be geographical, cultural, or emotional. The camel's quiet march through history reminds us of the value of slow, steady progress and the importance of patience in the face of obstacles. The rise of air travel, trains, and the internet may have sped up the rate at which we move goods and communicate, but it's important to remember that those early steps paved the way for the world we know today. The camels didn't just carry silk, they carried something much more profound, the idea that the world is more connected than it often seems. In their patient, deliberate pace, they taught us that the value of a journey isn't always in its speed, but in the connections it creates along the way. Today, when you take a moment to think about the products you use or the ideas you exchange with people from other parts of the world, consider how those connections are rooted in the legacy of the ancient Silk Road. The camels may no longer walk the desert, but they laid the foundation for the global exchange of goods, culture, and ideas. They were more than just pack animals, they were the original architects of a connected world. As we conclude our journey, take a moment to appreciate the incredible legacy these humble creatures left behind. Every global trade, every shared idea, every interaction across cultures is a testament to the spirit of the Silk Road. And while we may travel by planes and ships today, the fundamental human drive to connect and share remains the same. In a way, the camel's footsteps still echo through our modern lives, reminding us that the world is still connected, just as it was in the days when those ancient caravans slowly crossed the desert sands. So, as you go about your day, whether you sip a cup of tea or send a message to someone halfway around the world, think of the camels that made it all possible. Their journey was not just one of survival, it was a journey that shaped the course of human history, bringing the world closer together, one slow, steady step at a time. And in this world, where everything seems to move at lightning speed, perhaps we can all learn a little something from the camel's quiet persistence and patience. As we reach the final chapter of our journey, it's time to slow down the pace and reflect. The camels have long since disappeared from the vast deserts of Central Asia, but their legacy lives on in every corner of the globe. In a world that often feels disconnected, it's easy to forget the simple power of connection. The story of the camels and the Silk Road is more than just a tale of ancient trade, it's a reminder of the ways in which human beings have always sought to understand and connect with one another, despite the distance that separates us. Today, we are all part of a world that is more connected than ever. Thanks to technology, we can communicate with anyone, anywhere, in an instant. Goods from all over the world are delivered to our doorsteps, and ideas flow freely across borders. The global trade routes of the past have been replaced by high-speed digital connections and instant deliveries, but the fundamental principle remains the same. We continue to trade, share, and exchange in the same spirit that guided those ancient caravans. The camels, in their quiet endurance, helped lay the foundation for a world that, though vastly different, still carries their legacy forward. Take a moment to think about the products you use daily, the tea you might sip, the clothes you wear, the spices that flavor your food. These goods, once carried by camels over great distances, have traveled through centuries of trade and culture, surviving through war, peace, and the shifting tides of history. They connect us to a time when the world was smaller, when a camel's steady pace was the means by which we bridged great divides. Today, those goods still travel far and wide, not on the backs of camels, but still embodying that same spirit of global exchange and connection. The legacy of the camels also reminds us of the importance of patience. In today's fast-paced world, we often feel pressured to move quickly, to get things done fast, and to keep up with the speed of modern life. But there's wisdom in the camel's deliberate, steady pace. Sometimes, it's not the fastest route that gets us where we need to go, it's the journey itself, the connections we make along the way, and the persistence it takes to get through the difficult stretches. Just as the camels trudged across the hot, endless sands, taking each step one after another, we too can take comfort in knowing that steady progress, even if slow, is still progress. As we reflect on the journey of the camels and the Silk Road, it's also important to remember that history is not just about the past, it's about the present and the future we are still creating. The connections forged on those ancient trade routes continue to shape our world today, and the spirit of exchange and collaboration that those camels embodied is still alive and well. Every time we trade, share, and connect with someone from another part of the world, we are continuing the work that those ancient traders began. The camels may no longer walk the desert, but their influence is still felt in every global transaction, in every cultural exchange, and in every connection we make. As the caravan winds down in the desert, the camels finally come to a rest. The traders, weary from their long journey, sit down beside their animals, grateful for their steadfast companions. The wind gently blows over the sand, and for a moment, all is calm. The world may be vast, but in this moment, it feels small, connected by the shared experiences of traders, camels, and the goods they carried. And as we finish our journey today, we can carry with us the lessons of the camels, resilience, patience, and the value of making connections. Their quiet endurance and unwavering reliability remind us that no matter how fast the world moves, there is always value in taking things one step at a time. As the camels have shown us, even the longest and hardest journeys are made possible by slow, steady progress, and by the connections that we make along the way. So, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. In a world that's constantly changing, remember the camel's steady pace, their role in connecting civilizations, and the deep legacy they left behind. Just as the camels carried the dreams and hopes of the traders, we too carry our own hopes as we continue to build connections across the globe. Their journey may have ended, but their spirit continues to live on, guiding us through the modern-day trade routes that connect the world together. Now, as we close this chapter, take a deep breath. Let the calm settle in as the journey comes to an end, knowing that the spirit of the Silk Road lives on in each connection, each step, and each moment of exchange.